Apple's next official event is now rumored to be coming on March 8th, which is less than a month away from today, and that is extremely exciting since we've been basically going through a little tech drought over the holidays and into the new year. And as far as what we can expect to be revealed at the event next month, we're definitely going to be getting a couple of very boring updates to the iPad Air and the iPhone SE. But other than that, Mark Gurman did say that Apple plans to launch at least one new Mac this spring, and if you're wondering if this could be the new redesigned M2 MacBook Air that we recently showed off in these beautiful renders, don't get excited because Mark said that those M2 Macs will likely launch later in the year. So with that said, I actually believe that we are now 100% guaranteed to get a new redesigned Mac Mini at Apple's event next month. And before I dig deep into all the leaks and rumors and my thoughts on the design and how it's all gonna work, let me first go through all of the evidence that points to a launch next month. First of all, within Mark Gurman's report, he said that an Apple Silicon replacement for the 27-inch iMac is not expected to launch until as late as August or September, which is really unfortunate. And with the iMac out of the way, the other option is potentially the new Mac Pro, which everyone is expecting to get released later in the year, like Dylan DKT, who said he expects it to launch in the fourth quarter, which makes perfect sense to me. So that simply leaves the high-end Mac Mini that's next up for a redesign and update. And we know this for sure because it's one of the only Macs that is still relying on an Intel CPU, so it 100% needs to get replaced before Apple's 2-year timeline for the Apple Silicon transition is over. And on top of that, Apple has already released their M1 Pro and M1 Max chips, which are the ones that are expected to go into this new Mac Mini, so there's no holdup on the hardware side. But going even deeper, John Prosser from Front Page Tech was the one who first revealed the renders for the Mac Mini last year, and he said it could come as early as the end of 2021. And that's actually what a bunch of other analysts believed, like Dylan DKT, who was pretty sure the Mac Mini would be released alongside the new 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pros, but unfortunately it didn't happen because Apple wanted the absolute most attention on the MacBooks instead of sharing it with the Mac Mini. And if this is true, then it's very likely that the Mac Mini could have been ready to launch late last year, but it's just been sitting there on a shelf waiting for another Apple event so that they could launch it. Because whenever Apple gives a product a major redesign, they almost always choose to show it off at an event to get the maximum amount of press coverage. And if any product redesign deserves a slot in a dedicated Apple event, it's hands down the Mac Mini, because believe it or not, the general shape and design has stayed almost identical since 2010. Yes, that means it kept the same chassis for almost 12 full years, which is mind-blowing, and I don't think this has ever happened to any other Apple product, so it obviously deserves to be shown off at an event, and I'm gonna go ahead and say it, it's gonna happen at next month's event, 100% guaranteed, no doubt about it. And the reason this makes sense is because Apple still has a lot of Macs to release this year and only a handful of potential events to show off these new designs, which include a full redesign for the high-end iMac, a new Mac Pro, a new redesigned MacBook Air, and of course, the Mac Mini. So without further ado, let's jump right into all the nitty-gritty details about the Mac Mini redesign and what we should expect from it. John Prosser's original renders created by Ian Zelbo showed off a much thinner Mac Mini with rounded off edges at the top, but the most curious part of the design is that Apple is choosing to give it a plexiglass top. Now this detail is important because having a plastic top will instantly make it easier for the Bluetooth and Wi-Fi antennas to get a stronger signal, because if you didn't already know, people have been having connectivity issues because of the full metal redesign that we got many years ago. And if you think the whole plexiglass thing is wild, it's actually not, because that's exactly what the original Mac Mini came with, so it seems like Apple is bringing the old design back. And just to confirm this detail, Leaks Apple Pro on Twitter shared some leaked CAD files that showed off a metal chassis with a completely separate top piece that matches John's renders. And this detail is going to be very important to the cooling aspect, which I'll get back to in just a minute. Now moving around to the ports, these seem to be directly from the leaked CAD files, and it's definitely an awesome and exciting sign because it looks like we'll be getting 4 Thunderbolt 4 ports, which is a very nice addition on the Mac Mini. However, some of this doesn't really make much sense, like how these ports are way too close to each other compared to Apple's usual spacing on their recent 24-inch iMac. And the weirdest thing of all is how this render is missing the headphone jack, which is present on every single new Mac model out there, and it's even more important on the Mac Mini since it's a desktop machine that you can hook up to external speakers. So Apple Insider decided to make their own render of the new redesigned Mac Mini by Apple tomorrow on Twitter, which I've got to say look really good and clean. And they even made a new render that adds that headphone jack back in to see what it would look like. And I think the Thunderbolt spacing makes much more sense here. Now I do expect this model to come with the option of a 10 gigabit Ethernet port, just like the current M1 Mac Mini, and it looks like it's getting the new magnetic power connector, which I absolutely love on the new M1 iMac. And this detail is extremely important because when Apple added that new magnetic port to the 24-inch iMac, they also removed the internal power supply and gave it a bulky external power brick. And the point that I'm trying to make is that if Apple was willing to remove the internal power supply on the much larger iMac, then why wouldn't they do the same thing with the Mac Mini, since they probably already produce a ton of those external bricks? And if they do end up doing this, it would save them a massive amount of internal space on the inside of the Mac Mini. For example, if you look at a teardown of the current M1 Mac Mini, the actual logic board that houses the M1 chip and the cooling system is tiny compared to the size of the chassis itself, and a pretty big chunk of the design is taken up by the power supply alone. So if the newly redesigned Mac Mini ditches the internal power supply, then there's going to be a lot of room on the inside for a bigger logic board, and more importantly, a bigger cooling system. Now moving over to the bottom side, John showed off a completely flat bottom with these nice looking rubber pads, and I think this totally makes sense. But the interesting detail is that the exhaust vent that's currently on the back of the M1 Mac Mini has now been moved over to the bottom, and this also makes sense because the new Mac Mini is so much thinner than before. But the big question this leads up to is how in the world is the cooling system going to work, because with the previous design, the Mac Mini sat on a rubber circular pad, and air would literally flow in through the crack around the edges of that pad, which is genius engineering. But looking at the new design renders, the bottom looks like it's sealed apart from the exhaust vent. And even if there was an intake vent, it would be a bad idea for it to be on the bottom because it could end up pulling hot air from that bottom facing exhaust vent. But if you really put some thought into it and take a close look at the renders, you'll see that there is a perfect opportunity for Apple to add a thin crack all around the edge of the plexiglass top, and that can act as the intake, similar to how the current intake works, but on the top and located towards the front. And this would actually work incredibly well because the air would flow through the entire chassis from the front to the back and through the exhaust vents for optimal cooling of the chips. And speaking of the chips, I don't expect it to get anything more than the current M1 Pro and M1 Max chips that we already have on the MacBook Pros, so the performance should be identical to those laptops. And in terms of the pricing, I personally expect it to come in at $1299 for the base model with the M1 Pro chip, which will likely be binned just like the base 14-inch MacBook Pro. And to be honest, that's still a very good deal considering the amount of power and optimization that you're getting. Now, if you disagree with my idea of the redesigned Mac Mini getting revealed at next month's Apple event, then let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. But if you enjoyed this video, go ahead and click the circle above to subscribe for more videos like this one. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.